Hello and welcome to another edition of the Learning Lounge with Atenti. Once again, we have another one of our superstars with us, Jonathon. Jonathon, please introduce yourself. Tell us a little about what you do here at Atenti.
Most probably oversold by superstar, but I am Vice President of Sales and Sales Operations and predominantly focus on the NHS and healthcare providers across the globe. Supporting them and giving them our amazing tools.
Fantastic. Welcome to the show, Jonathon. Thanks for being here as well. So really would obviously want to spend this session digging into that a little bit more. So NHS is obviously something I would assume everybody's aware of what the NHS is. So if I was to ask Jonathon, what's inspired NHS Trusts like the Northwest to adopt game-based learning?
Yeah, we capitalised on an event a few years ago, which we were at, focused on digital adoption. And the NHS in the Northwest particularly have a skills development network, which is fantastic. And they do amazing work supporting all the trusts in the region with digital skills. And we went to an event, we met with some key stakeholders, and we've seen a real rise in how they want to engage with their systems. So there's plenty of data out there and plenty of government programs to encourage trusts to go digital and to have digital systems. That is a hard process to go from an organisation that 5 years ago was using fax machines and even to today heavily relies on paper-based system to a digital system. So as they do that, there's also a massive encouragement for them to make that efficient and also deliver that training. So when we started speaking with trusts, we found that digital adoption was key, how to get staff up to speed on their systems. And so since that event and over the last 4 years, we've started working with a large number of trusts in that region. What's great about the Skills Development Network, and a big shout out to them, is actually the work that they're now doing across the country. So that program is countrywide. So I'm in the midst of a roadshow at the moment, 2 events down northeast, and London's done. I've got the southeast in a week's time, and then a number of other roadshows where we're out helping them understand what we can do to enable that for them.
Amazing. Sounds great. So obviously, I think what I'm hearing, there's a lot of similarities with what you've mentioned across other sectors as well, which is no great surprise. But we do know, of course, that healthcare is going to have unique challenges, certainly in the healthcare sector for sure. So how does game-based learning, or how has game-based learning aligned with those challenges?
Yeah, and anyone who's read anything I've ever put on LinkedIn or talk about knows that I try and dumb down the game-based stuff, not because we're not really good at it, the system's amazing at it, but because sometimes that's lost in translation, that all we do is stick points and leaderboards on content. And I'm very passionate about Atenti so much more than points and leaderboards. So when we're working with trusts, their biggest challenge is freeing up people's time. And and what's great about getting to work in the NHS is there's a few key things when I'm talking to them is, first of all, no one goes to work wanting to do a bad job. So it's a really captive market. They want to do a great work. So that's great. And we also know that they didn't join the NHS to be sat at a desk doing computer work. In actual fact, my wife works in the NHS, and sitting in front of a computer is not where she wants to be. But she understands the value of it by the fact that it helps and it can speed up process that she gets to see more patients. So when we talk to trusts about how do we engage with learners, and how do we make it useful for them? It's how's it engaging? What mechanisms can we use, like characters, and build an emotional attachment to those characters? Because most of the people in the NHS are there for the people that they're supporting. So that's the first key point.
Kind of got that real life element.
Exactly, and it's in context. So all the trusts we talk to, we're always talking about how do we put this into a real world context, and we do that in all of our customers. I always use a great story. I was a troublemaker in maths until money came out because I didn't understand the point of a triangle and learning about all the theories behind it. But the moment money came out and it was about me actually doing something in a shop, I'm all in. So how do we help people who want to learn in a way in which, okay, I understand what I do, but how does this impact what I do?
Yeah.
And why would I use this? Not just how do I use a system, but why would I use a system? So that's the element that's grabbed a lot of attention.
Yeah.
But the impact has been unbelievable. And I've worked at Attensi now for 7 years. I remember my first project was around our process tool and digital adoption in the private sector, and I started seeing the data coming through. But now in the NHS, which is definitely a passion of mine, seeing how much time we're able to free up for frontline workers to actually put them to A, do something they want to do, but B, make a bigger difference because we're freeing up that time. I think that's something that really hits home for the trusts and why they invest in over, sitting in the classroom for 6 hours.
Of course. Listening to talk, and again, without making too many assumptions, but typically you make an assumption that somebody going into healthcare as a job is there to make a difference.
It's a vocation.
In people's life.
Yeah, it's a vocation for sure.
Sense. So just touching on to the theme and the word engagement's come up a few times. So obviously, healthcare environments are crazy busy, right? For all the things we've discussed so far. Can you give us an example of how maybe the Attensi's platform has improved staff engagement?
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of things here. One, and we get asked and challenged a lot, is which demographic? Is this really for our consultants who are busy doing surgery? Is this really for our nurses who are super busy and don't have time and really aren't buying into our digital system because they really just want to help people?
Yeah.
And the answer is it works across all of them. Lots of motivators are into the platform that allow people to engage on what makes them tick and what actually motivates them, whether it's a leaderboard, whether it's a storyline, whether it's the noises, whether it's actually just being really good at my job. And we see that in the survey data that comes out. But the impact that we see when we work with many trusts is that reduction in taking people off the front line and that level of engagement in their digital systems, which means their time to competency is much quicker. We've trained 5,000 staff in 2 weeks. That's just not possible in traditional methods. And even if it is possible in traditional methods through videos or PDFs, they're not sure that that's being absorbed and people are really taking away what they need. Whereas in the evidence that we can give them that, we did a project recently where 98% of the people on shift on the first day after a go live had certified in all of the training they needed. That's a big weight lifted off the trust that they're ready to go. I was actually talking with someone, I won't name their name because I'm not sure how much they want me to reveal, but I was talking with someone from the NHS recently, and they mentioned in that area 2 trusts have delayed a full IT project rollout because they are worried about adoption and system adoption.
As in people
using it. So they think they can get the system out there, but actually,
what's the point
if people are going to stand back and not buy in, then that's going to be a problem. I was talking to another trust in the south recently, and they said, we went with a system, and after 6 months we had to stop because it was a mobile device system. People just left the mobile devices and no one was using it. And they'd invested that time, that money, that energy, and because of adoption, weren't able to get out. Whereas what we're able to see with the trusts that we work with, and not just in the NHS, but all organisation, is a real clear cut of these learners have learnt this, and this means they're ready to go and do their job and attack their job and do the best they can. So I think the impact for us is really that time to engagement and how do users get access to it? When do they want to access it? And it gives them that freedom. So compared to traditional methods, it's really about that assurance for trusts. And then beyond that, the impact is, and I always present this in a slide, but there's those 3 key elements. How do we get engagement? How do we track? And then actually, how do we create? Because, okay, great, you've created some amazing content. Great, people have engaged with it. Great, you can track who's done it. But systems don't stand still. Systems are ever changing. In 6 months, that system, a lot of the training you developed will be starting to come out of date. So how quickly can we edit that? Well, I think what we've seen with Trust is being able to jump in, make those changes and deploy them for new users and existing users. And now with AI speeding up that side of the things, it makes it so much quicker for them.
Yeah, so I'm hearing kind of flexibility around creations is key, but also, you know, you mentioned that those AI powered tools also be much quicker, and so effective, efficient, and flexible. So just that word flexible seems like a bit of a silly question to ask, given what you said, Jonathon. But how important is training flexibility in the healthcare environment?
Yeah, it's huge. Keeping up with the systems is really important, but not many people will see the behind the scenes of the NHS. They see the front end workers, and it takes you X number of minutes, hours to get in front of someone. But behind the scenes, there's a whole network of systems that are keeping us safe, keeping our data and making it more efficient for trusts. So that flexibility to be able to not just do one IT system, but what we're able to do is train them on a process from start to finish, from the moment you talk to someone to the moment you need to discharge them. I think with Liverpool, the flexibility that they found is they created this character called Eleanor, and she's an elderly character. I remember some of the calls back and forth around how old she looked and how ill she looked, and we had to dial that up a little bit. But she comes into hospital and you follow her journey, but the flexibility for the worker is that they see the part they play in the journey, and it's the system they're going to use, not just it's not this might look a bit like the system. It's always their system, and it's a real patient that they're building an attachment to and keeping their record up to date, and understanding what part they play in it is super important. But for the trust, it's how quick can we develop that? How flexible can we be at changing that? Because a lot of trusts now, there was early adopters who are now going and readdressing whether they need to keep that system. And then there's now trusts that are moving to new systems where that flexibility to be able to change the screens, but the process doesn't change. Someone's broken a leg, you need to go through a set process. That process doesn't change, but the systems within it do. How quick can I change those systems out? And when we make changes, how quick can I make those changes? So that's where we see a real buzz from the users we have. We have, and it's a bit of a plug, but we have our first creator forum happening in the NHS up in the Northeast, because they were the early adopters with Atenzi, where we're going to bring together all of the creators in the region from Atenzi, and we're going to share best practice. We're going to talk about what AI means to creation. We're going to talk about tips, hints, starting to share. And what I love about working within the NHS is they want to share with each other. It's not like I've got two competing brands and I have to put up a Chinese wall. No, these guys want to share with each other. So they're happy to share content. They're happy to talk about what works really well for them. It's great for me when I'm talking to new trusts. Like, you can just talk to any of these trusts because they want to talk to you and tell you.
It's got an in-house team.
Exactly. So I always talk to them that they can always come and work here, but they can talk to each other and share best practice as well, which I think is great. And we've got a number of trusts starting to say, well, if you're certified on the same system we use with Atenzi at a different trust, well, just bring that certificate with you. You don't need to do our training. We'll tick you, you've done it, because we trust the training, we trust that system. You're good to go. So that's amazing as well, starting to build those relationships between trusts that have the same system, share the content, and actually, if a user's done the training, be able to say, okay, they've done it, don't worry about it.
Well, when we talk about flexibility, I mean, there's flexibility right there, right? Between trusts have been able to do that. It's pretty game-changing itself.
And we're seeing it more across NHS. I'm not sure how many people are aware, but NHS is going through huge changes. Only in the last few days, there's been announcements of huge change at the top, but there is definitely a more joined-up thinking than ever before. We've got CIOs that are joint CIO for a number of trusts, which is great because they're in the local area, they're going to buy together, they're going to work together, they can get economies of scale, but also there's a continuity for the employees. So for us, that's great. Same style of training, they're used to it, and that's why we've seen that growth. The event was great, and the Skills Development Network have been fantastic at supporting us there, but also it's about employees moving from trust to trust, going, oh, well, we did this training over here and it was really great. Maybe you should have a look. And we also had a referral from a private client. A daughter came home and showed us some training she was doing. She's like, we could use that. And then rang me and was like, do you work with the NHS? And I was like, yes, right next door. So let me talk to him. And, oh, great. Okay. This is definitely how we can learn. In actual fact, I think the NHS are leading the way in some aspects in adopting this style of training, but they've always bought into this style of training. Learning by doing is nothing new for them. They have the most simulation people we ever work with. Full simulation rooms that we walk into for doctors to do surgery or to simulate high crisis events.
I actually wanted to ask you about that. So high stake environment.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
I think everyone watching this will understand what I mean by that. So where does simulation come in? What role does that play?
The NHS is fully bought into simulation. They're doing it without attendee on a much more high stakes place. What we're doing in the NHS is still high stakes. My wife always encourages me not to play down how much impact we have. But the NHS is bought into this way of learning. It's just how do you make it scalable? Like, can we really do simulation training for IT training? Is that cost effective? Well, in actual fact, when we start working with the trust and they start seeing it, yes, it is cost effective. Yes, they can do it. And yes, it really brings real impact for them. So the simulation aspect is something that the staff are used to, but not necessarily on IT training or not on mandatory training. It's more on CPR or high stakes events. But we're also doing stuff globally, doing a lot of stuff in the US and in Europe. We were doing something time to needle with an organization where it's tracking a patient from when they get into an ambulance for a stroke through to diagnosing them. How quick can that happen? And is everyone who's part of that timeline up to speed with the different elements that need to be taken into consideration? And it's one of the most compelling sims I've ever seen us do, where you get the call from the ambulance, you go through this process, and by the end, you've got to make a decision on what injection you're going to give, what treatment plan you're going to put in place. And what they found was, not only is that great for the staff that do this, but it's also great for the staff that support, because the nurses can see the pressure that everyone's under through that process. So when they're in that situation, they're there to try and help rather than be confused about what's happening. And so it's those sorts of simulations we're doing are also amazing, but even the IT simulations that we're doing have an impact and are amazing in their own way, is how my wife puts it to me anyway.
It's pretty cool to hear. So we talk about practicing, learning and training in a safe environment.
Yeah.
I think what you've described really takes that to another level. So just tied to that, and it might seem quite obvious, but I'm going to ask a question anyway. So kind of measuring completion, attendance of training versus competency. Why is competency so much more important?
Yeah, well, it's, it is high stakes. Whether we recently did something with Greater Manchester, and we've just done some pieces on the work we've done there with the APMA system. And that's high stakes. That's a prescription system. You can't get prescriptions wrong. That's not something you want to ever be in a situation where that happens. So someone's competency on a system is the most important thing that the IT teams are facing. How do they ensure that? And what they've found is that's really hard. And when you actually take a step back and you think, well, how do you ensure someone can use the system properly? Unless you're able to sit with them for a week, watching them use the system, you can't know if that training session they sat in, if that video they watched or that PDF they read actually went in. What we're able to do is say, here's the training, but we're going to now measure, is this person competent to be able to use the system, unsupported, left on their own? Can they get through this system? Can they prove to themselves on a confidence base? Because a lot of people, like I said, these people, NHS workers aren't there to be IT experts. They're there to help people. So they want the confidence to be able to prove to themselves they can use the system effectively and efficiently and compliant. But for the trust themselves to be able to say, okay, we can see all of our employees are trained on what they need to be trained on and can prove to us that they've actually learned and used the system without our support is so valuable to.
So how might they use that data? So the NHS Trust in question, so they've got that competency data. How might they use that to future improve their training?
Well, first they use it without jumping into future. They use it, they won't give people access without completing it.
Okay.
So unless you've got certified in your training, you don't get the card.
And you can show competency.
Yeah. Unless you can pass the driving test.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's very much like that. You go out with an instructor, you learn by doing, you have your driving lessons, and then the computer sitting next to you, really, rather than an assessor, and says, can you now do it without anyone telling you what to do?
Yeah.
And you might be allowed a couple of minor tweaks, but if you get anything majorly wrong, you're going to have to try and do this again. So that insurance that they're ready to drive the car, they're ready to drive the system, therefore they get the keys. For the trust, what's really great is we're able to give them lots of different sets of data, and I always break it down into three. That's really important for them. Is the first is which employees have done it, how have they done, and which departments and how have they done. And I always go back to in the middle of COVID, we were rolling out with a trust, and it was ICU doctors that had the most engagement in our platform, which is just crazy when you think about it. But they want to make sure they know what they're doing and be at the very top and be efficient in what they're doing, because they've got to go for a lot of patients as quickly as possible. So we know it engages with them. So they've got that data. They've got the data of how's the training performing? Is it too hard? Is it too easy? What do we need to tweak to make it more engaging and make sure it's delivering? And then we can give them one final set of data that's quite unique to the way in which we work with Trust for IT training is, how's the system performing? So is your system really, really user-friendly? Is the UI really what it needs to be? Or in actual fact, should we be considering moving a button rather than trying to train users out of this bad habit they've got into? Maybe we could just move the button. So they get that data to be able to say, actually, maybe it's us, not the user, or it's the user, we need to focus on this area because this is clearly a challenge. It's taking longer for users to get through this system. This specific process is harder. Maybe we need to introduce a bit more focus on that training and increase that training where it goes back to flexibility of, well, quickly we can write a new module to just focus on this key element. So the data is really key. And what I love about working in the NHS is, again, as a forefront or forward-thinking organisation, they love data. They really do. And they have data analysts. They are really focused on how to get the most out of their data. And we're doing a project at the moment with Trust where they've got the data of all their support tickets. So looking at all their support tickets and what they can solve with training and saying, well, these are the top 10 areas we can save support time and users time by logging support tickets, whereas good training will negate that. That's not a system error. It's actually users not having access to the right training or being trained in the right way. So again, using that data to understand where to deploy training as well.
That's incredible. And I don't want to under or over simplify, but to just summarize. So, the data that's provided on training completion, competency, etc., the NHS Trusts are actually using that to support improving their system, not just as a measure of, well, we need to change the training. It's actually, we don't need to change training, we need to change our physical systems to support that.
Which process takes the longest? Why does it take long? Which step in that process actually adds 15 seconds to that process? And if you've got tens of thousands of employees that are doing that regularly, well, there's time to be saved there, not just, okay, Joe Bloggs has done this training, great, let's move on.
It's powerful stuff. Really powerful stuff. So talk to us a little bit about kind of feedback we've received in particular from the learners.
I go on stage with a CNIO that we've worked with previously. I remember she tells one story. So this is secondhand hearsay to a degree, but I think she's talked about on a webcast we've done in the past, where she says she met a nurse who was doing a night shift one night, and they said, I can't. This training's too much. This isn't what I just want to be able to do my job. And she was like, this is going to help you. Trust me, log in, have a go. If you don't like it after that, we'll get someone to come and support you. They have floor walkers. They have amazing teams that are there because not everyone loves intensive style of learning. I don't understand why, but not everyone loves it.
Still get out there. It's not for
but 95, 96, 97%, depending on the surveys we do. But she says this nurse went away. The next night she saw her. They'd just gone live with, or just about to go live with a system. And she said, I'm telling everyone we need to do this. This is incredible. I can just do it when I want to do it. And the CNI was like, this is for you too. And she's like, no, but there's no one watching. If I get wrong, no one cares. I can just do it again until I'm ready. And
nothing bad happens.
Nothing bad happens. But I do have one piece of feedback. And Jackie was telling me this, and I was like, what was the feedback? She didn't really smile when we discharged the patient at the end. I was like, we can solve that. It's 2 flicks of a button to solve that. So in actual fact, we can solve that very easily. But typically, that's the kind of feedback we get. People really enjoy the characters, the ability to do this when they want to do it in a time that suits them. They don't have that much downtime. So getting them in the classroom is not ideal. Watching videos doesn't engage them. So how do you give them time to do this, but actually it really have an impact for them? And we see them doing it 5, 6, 7 times, one piece of module. I always say that I don't even watch my favourite film 7 times. And they spend millions of pounds producing that films and put great looking actors into it. And I don't want to watch it 7 times. So why would someone want to watch a training video 7 times or read a PDF 7 times?
That's a good point.
And they definitely can't go to a classroom training 7 times. So to get users that engaged, that they want to engage with the training, I think super, super impactful for the employees and the frontline workers.
I love it. I'm just sat here thinking, have I watched a movie 7 times before? Probably not.
Especially not over a couple of weeks span.
Definitely not. Definitely not. Maybe as a child, but that's for another time. So, Jonathon, listen, everything you talk through, and obviously I'm aware of what you've been involved in and the work that's gone on, and it's quite inspiring. But if I was to ask you, and I'm sure there's many, but what pops to mind if I was to ask you for a proud moment?
Yeah, I've got one NHS one and one non-NHS one, but I think they're both really valid. My non-NHS one was before we actually really broke into NHS, and it was coming to work one day. I won't name the client, but we were on an escalator and 2 people in front of me was playing a sim and laughing. And I was like, oh, they must work for Tenzi. We're on the same way. Looked round, didn't recognise them. Looked at the sim, realised what the sim was. It was a supermarket chain. I was like, oh, okay, sold that, and now I'm helping someone. That's a really proud moment. But I think with the NHS, which is by far one of my biggest highlights of my career, is the Liverpool project we did. It was the hardest project for sure. We were in the middle of COVID. They were rolling out a whole new IT stack to one whole hospital, 5,000 users. I'll never forget, shall I say, and I'll remember the calls we had late night with the nursing team and the IT team, because that was the only time they were available. And then we roll out and we see the difference that the training makes, being able to train 5,000 people really quickly, knowing that the alternative for them was classroom. And they tell me a number, 6, 8, 12 hours, depending on your role, of how long we would have had to take users off the front line. We take 5,000 frontline users, times that by that sort of number, and we found that the average time to complete the training was 2 hours, and they had that confidence that everyone was compliant and done, and it was all ready to go on go live day. And then you take that reflection back, and I was doing some numbers on the amount of time we saved, allowing people to be on the front line in the middle of a pandemic, not just for what we've done, but now what we do moving forward. And first-hand experience with my wife working in the NHS, I know how much time she puts towards wanting to be with patients, not wanting to be in the classroom training or IT learning, but actually wanting to be spent with the patients. The more efficient she can be, the better. I think that's super, super important. And now when we work with trusts, I think I'm in a very privileged position at Tenzi, because while all of the people here do amazing jobs, getting to work with such a important sector, and some of the charity work we've started doing off the back of it, and some of the work we do with some really amazing trusts. Not that any trust isn't amazing, but some of the work we've done with Clatterbridge Cancer Centre, again, knowing how much we can try and impact and how much our platform can impact those employees who are doing such an amazing job. For me, that most probably outweighs what the trust gets out of it, more what the employees can get out of it. I think we were looking the other day, and we're putting some data up. I think we've had nearly 1 million playthroughs for Tenzi by NHS employees. Wow. And so the number of people we're touching and helping and making life a little bit better, then I think that's an amazing part for what we do.
That's definitely something to be proud of. 1 million playthroughs. Wow. Amazing. Jonathon, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been a pleasure. If you would like to learn more about what we do here at Attensi and game-based learning, obviously, please do reach out and connect. If you'd like to hear more about the great work Jonathon's done across the UK with the NHS Trust, of course, you can reach out to him directly. But you will find some fantastic articles and lots of great stuff around the work we've done with the NHS on our website. And of course, you can book a call with us and get yourself in the driving seat of some of our solutions. But that's it for now. We look forward to seeing you again really soon.